He didn't even look back. That's what broke me. Not the rain soaking through my jacket, not the busted tail light flickering red as he sped off. Not even the fact that my knee had started hurting from standing too long on the gravel shoulder. It was the way my own son, my boy, didn't so much as glance in the rearview mirror. I stood there like a fool, holding the grocery bag that had ripped halfway, the oranges rolling into the ditch, the bread getting wet in the mud. Cars passed on the highway, spraying cold mist that clung to my jeans. I didn't even raise my hand to wave. I just stood there. He left me. My name is Thomas Rayburn. I'm 66 years old, and I live, or used to live, in a modest ranch-style house on the east side of Columbus, Ohio. Born and raised here. I'm a retired postal worker, worked 42 years in the same zip code, rain or shine. And I've got one son, Kyle, 32. No wife. Cancer took her when Kyle was 14. And before I go on, if you're hearing this, I'd love to know where you're watching from. The Father's Advice channel keeps stories like this going, and every name in the comments means something to us old men who still have something to say. So if this story hits close to home, let us know. We read every one. Back to the rain. He said he'd take me to the bank. That's all it was supposed to be. I'd mentioned the hot water tank was acting up again, and he offered, kind of casually, to drive me across town to sort out the loan paperwork. I should have known something was off. He wasn't his usual distracted self. He was too nice. Asked if I needed anything. Told me to wear my good coat. I figured, well, maybe we're finally turning a corner. Maybe he's realizing I'm not going to be around forever. We pulled off at a gas station. He said he needed to grab something from inside. I waited. Rain started coming down. Light at first, then steady. Then it was like the sky just broke open. 5 minutes, 10. Then he came back. Tossed a small brown paper bag on the passenger seat. And then he looked at me, not with anger, not even with guilt, just like I wasn't there, like I was some old man asking for too much. "Dad," he said, "I think you should figure things out on your own from here." I laughed. Thought he was kidding. I said, "What?" He didn't repeat it. Just got back in the driver's seat, threw the car into reverse and left. I stood there long after he was gone. No umbrella, no phone, just me, the wind, and the sharp realization that love, real love, doesn't always last forever. I didn't go home that night, not right away. And when I did, something inside me had changed. I didn't say a word, but I knew exactly what I was going to do next. The rain came home with me. It followed me through the screen door, dripped onto the laminate kitchen floor, soaked into the old welcome mat my wife had bought back in '92. I didn't even take off my jacket, just stood there in the dark, staring at the stove clock blinking 7:43 p.m. like it had something smart to say. Everything was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the ceiling fan I never bothered to fix. I didn't call Kyle, didn't text, didn't ask why. I walked into the living room, slow, with the weight of wet socks and heavier thoughts. The TV was still paused on a daytime courtroom show I'd left on that morning. I sat in the recliner that had started to lose its cushion, and I looked around. This was my house, the one I bought in '89 with a VA loan right after Kyle was born. It smelled like coffee grounds and old memories. The photos on the wall hadn't changed in years. My wife Linda, smiling on the porch in a red cardigan. Kyle, front teeth missing, holding a toy dinosaur. That was a long time ago. I used to think a home was just a roof, walls, maybe a good water heater if you were lucky. But sitting there, I realized it was never about the walls. It was about who stood beside you inside them. And right now, it was just me. An old man in soggy clothes, with a son who'd rather let him stand in a storm than sit beside him in silence. I made a cup of instant coffee. Didn't even heat it enough. It tasted like wet cardboard. I drank it anyway. Then I went to the bedroom, opened the bottom drawer of my dresser, the one nobody touches. Inside was a yellow folder, the house deed, paid off in full 2 years ago. Next to it was a set of business cards from a realtor named Sheila Lang, a friend of a friend who helped a neighbor move to Florida last year. I picked one out, held it in my hand like it was something dangerous. For 34 years, I've mowed that lawn, patched those gutters, scraped ice off the driveway at 5 in the morning. I planted the oak tree out back when Kyle turned 10, and I was there every single Christmas morning, even the ones after Linda passed. But something inside me knew this house didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to ghosts, to echoes, to the idea that Kyle might one day come back and say, "Dad, I'm sorry." But he wouldn't. And even if he did, some things can't be undone. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, the yellow folder open, and dialed Sheila's number. The line rang once, twice, and then a calm voice answered. "Sheila speaking." I cleared my throat. "Hi, this is Thomas Rayburn. I think I'm ready to sell." I didn't tell anyone, not the neighbors, not Kyle, not even Joyce from church, who always asked how I was doing with those eyes that looked like they already knew the answer. Some things you don't announce. Some things you just do. Sheila came by 2 days later. Sharp woman, early 50s, polite but efficient. She wore a navy blue trench coat and looked around the house like she was already picturing it in someone else's hands. "Place has good bones," she said, running a hand along the mantel. "You kept it clean." "I try," I muttered, standing there like a stranger in my own living room. She took pictures, room by room. I stood back. Every flash of the camera felt like a small goodbye. The next morning, I started packing, not like some dramatic movie scene with boxes and breakdowns. No, it was quiet, slow, drawer by drawer, closet by closet. The kind of cleaning that feels like surgery, careful, precise, and a little bit bloody inside. I found Linda's old apron in the kitchen drawer. Still had a faint smell of rosemary and Clorox. I pressed it to my face and held my breath. In the bedroom there was a box of Kyle's school papers, a crooked art project of a tree with cotton balls for snow, his 5th grade spelling bee certificate. Most improved in science. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at it all. He used to come home and run straight into my arms. "Daddy, I got a star today." Now he drives away and leaves me in the rain. I boxed it all up, labeled it Kyle's Things. Not sure if I'd give it to him. But I couldn't leave it behind either. Every corner of this house whispered at me. The scratch in the hallway from when Kyle rode his bike indoors. The sink Linda used to hum beside. The back porch where I taught Kyle how to tie a fishing knot. Gone. All of it. I wrapped up the photo frames in old dish towels, taped the box shut. Somewhere between the 2nd and 3rd cup of coffee that day, I realized I hadn't felt this focused in years. Not since Linda died. I wasn't angry, not anymore. Just done. By nightfall, I had 4 boxes stacked in the living room and a to-do list that stretched longer than my patience. I looked around the house, empty shelves, bare counters, and felt a strange peace, like the house was finally exhaling. And for the first time since Kyle left me on that roadside, I whispered something out loud. "You don't deserve to know." Because I knew what would happen when the for sale sign went up. And I knew he'd come running, but by then, I wouldn't be here. The papers slid across the kitchen table like a quiet verdict. Sheila set them down with her polished nails, explaining the terms slowly, like she was speaking to someone fragile. I nodded along, pen in hand, reading every line twice. Not because I didn't trust her, but because this was the last piece of paper tying me to the life I'd built. "Once you sign these, Mr. Rayburn, we'll list the house within the week. Properties in this area don't stay long. You'll have offers fast." I gave a small laugh. "Faster than my son calls me, that's for sure." She looked at me carefully but didn't pry, just pointed where I needed to initial. The pen felt heavy, heavier than a hammer, heavier than a mailbag, but my hand was steady. I signed. It was done. When she left, the house felt different, colder but lighter somehow. I walked through the room slowly, kitchen first, that yellow linoleum floor Linda always hated. Living room, the sagging recliner I'd probably leave on the curb. The hallway still smelled faintly of paint from when Kyle was 10 and insisted on blue walls. Each room held a moment, a version of me I wasn't anymore. The man who promised his wife he'd keep their sons safe. The father who skipped lunch to afford soccer cleats. The widower who stayed up until dawn fixing a leaking pipe so Kyle could shower before school. He was still in there somewhere, but the house had become a museum of him, not a home. I went out back to the oak tree. It was taller than the roof now. I remembered Kyle helping me plant it, his small hands patting the dirt, grinning at the worms. "It's our tree, Dad. We'll sit under it when I'm big." We never did. I stood there until the wind cut through my jacket, staring at the branches, wondering how many storms they'd seen, wondering if the roots were deeper than mine. Back inside I brewed coffee, the way I always did, but I didn't sit down. I opened the freezer, pulled out a loaf of bread and started making sandwiches. Not because I was hungry, but because my hands needed to do something. I thought about calling Kyle, about telling him, even just as a courtesy. But then I remembered the rain, the sound of his tires slicing through water while I stood there with my groceries spilling into the ditch. No, he'd made his choice. This time, I was making mine. When the last sandwich was wrapped, I stacked them in the fridge like small soldiers. Then I walked to the living room, sat on the bare floor, and let the silence settle. It didn't feel like an ending. It felt like the first time in a long time that the decision was mine. The attic was the hardest. It smelled like cedar and dust and long-forgotten intentions. I climbed the pull-down ladder slow, knees popping with each step, flashlight beam shaking as it cut through cobwebs. Up there were boxes stacked like tombstones, Christmas lights, Linda's sewing machine, Kyle's old toys in plastic bins that had gone cloudy with time. I opened one, out spilled a Batman cape, a dented lunchbox, a baseball glove still small enough for a child's hand. I held it for a long time, rubbing my thumb over the cracked leather. For a second I could hear him again. "Dad, catch!" His voice high and full of faith that I would. I closed the box, taped it shut, set it aside for donation. Downstairs, Sheila was moving room to room, measuring, photographing, clicking her tongue at the sunlight spilling through the windows. "Buyers love natural light," she said. "And this neighborhood, prime location, will get you a good offer." I nodded, but my mind was far away. It was on Sunday mornings, Linda frying bacon, Kyle at the table coloring. It was on the nights I worked overtime so the mortgage would be paid. It was on every Christmas Eve I spent assembling toys after Kyle went to bed. I went into the basement next. Old paint cans, a cracked bird bath, the fishing rods I'd meant to use more. I didn't hesitate this time. Some went to the curb, some went into boxes. I was stripping the house down to its bones, the way I'd stripped my heart 2 nights ago when I decided. At noon, Sheila came back with a small metal sign and a wooden stake. "This is the part that's hardest for some folks," she said gently. "Do you want to be the one to put it in?" I shook my head. "You do it." She walked out front, her trench coat fluttering in the breeze. The hammer made a soft, dull sound as she drove the stake into the lawn. When she stepped back, the sign stood there, red and white. "For sale." I watched from the window. Not a single curtain twitched on the street. No one knew yet. Inside, I exhaled. It was like pulling out a splinter you'd lived with so long you'd forgotten it hurt. I made another cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the sign through the glass. My reflection looked back at me. A man older than his years, but still upright, still here. For the first time in a long time, the house felt like a place I was passing through, not chained to. And for the first time, the future didn't scare me as much as staying. The first knock on the door came at 10:15 a.m. 2 women in business jackets and a man with a tablet stepped inside like they were entering a stage set, not someone's life. Sheila smiled her professional smile and led them through the kitchen, pointing out the new windows and updated plumbing. They murmured, nodded, took pictures on their phones. I stood off to the side, leaning against the doorway like I didn't belong there either. They didn't see the pencil marks on the pantry wall where I'd measured Kyle's height every birthday. They didn't know about the first snowstorm Linda and I spent in this house, heating soup on a gas burner because the power had gone out. To them it was 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, hardwood floors. To me, it was everything I'd built. The second showing came that afternoon. A young couple, barely older than Kyle, walking hand in hand. "We could turn this into an office," she said, peeking into the spare bedroom that used to be Kyle's nursery. "And a playroom someday," he added. I felt a strange twist in my chest, not jealousy, not sadness exactly, just the realization that this house would have a new story, and mine would fade like old wallpaper under fresh paint. After they left, I walked from room to room again, barefoot now. The carpet felt cool and damp under my feet, like a memory you're not sure you want to keep. I opened the hall closet. There was my old mailbag, frayed at the edges, still smelling faintly of paper and rain. I ran my hand over it and thought about the mornings I left before dawn, delivering letters so my son could have a home. Every shift, every overtime, every Sunday worked was poured into these walls, and now I was letting it go. But something strange happened while I was standing there. I didn't feel broken anymore. I didn't feel like a man being forced out. I felt like a man opening a door. I went to the kitchen table, poured the last of the coffee from the pot, and stared out the window at the "For Sale" sign. Cars passed. A neighbor's dog barked. Life went on. Kyle still hadn't called. No text, no email, nothing. The silence from him had become its own weather system. Cold, steady, predictable. I thought it would hurt, but now it just confirmed what I already knew. I wasn't selling this house to punish him. I was selling it to save myself. I whispered it, just to hear the words out loud. "I'm done waiting." The sound of it was like a door closing and another one opening at the same time. By the end of the week, 3 offers had come in. Sheila sat across from me at the kitchen table with a neat folder. "All cash, no contingencies." "They want a quick close," she said, sliding one paper closer. "This is the best one." I held it in my hands, reading the numbers. More money than I'd imagined. Enough to do something with, enough to start over, enough to disappear if I wanted. "Do you need time to think?" she asked. I shook my head. "No, I've already been thinking for 34 years. She gave me a small smile, the kind people give when they know they're part of someone's turning point. I signed. And just like that, the house wasn't really mine anymore. It was under contract, waiting for the final signatures. The walls around me felt the same, but somehow already belonged to someone else. That night, I didn't sit in the recliner. I sat on the bare floor with a box of old letters and photographs spread around me like fallen leaves. Linda's handwriting on birthday cards. Kyle's scrawled "I love you, Dad" notes from when he was little. A yellowed bill of sale for our first car. Each paper a receipt for a life built out of sacrifice. I thought about every overtime shift. Every time I said no to myself so I could say yes to my son. The car I never bought, the vacations we never took. All so Kyle could have a home, a future, a father he could rely on. And in the end, he left me in the rain. I should have felt bitter, but I didn't, not anymore. I picked up a small photo. Me, Linda, and Kyle at the state fair. He's on my shoulders, holding a balloon, grinning at the camera like the world is nothing but possibility. I stared at it for a long time, then set it gently in a box labeled "Keep." The rest I stacked in another box. Donate. It was a strange kind of freedom. Like untying a knot that had been in my chest for years. Before bed, I sat at the kitchen table and took out a small notebook, wrote down a single line. Use the money for life, not for legacy. I didn't know yet what that meant exactly. A small apartment somewhere quiet. A trip I'd never allowed myself. Maybe a workshop, maybe a garden. All I knew was that whatever came next would be mine, not built for someone else. I closed the notebook, turned off the kitchen light, and stood in the dark one last time, feeling like a man stepping out of a shadow he'd lived in too long. Soon, Kyle would find out. But by then, I'd be gone. The closing date was set for the 15th. 2 weeks. 14 days until the house no longer had my name on it, legally or emotionally. You'd think I'd feel wrecked by that. But all I felt was stillness. Like standing in a room after a loud engine shuts off. The kind of quiet that makes you realize how long you've been screaming inside. I started doing something I hadn't done in years. Walking. Not to the grocery store, not for errands. Just walking. Down streets I hadn't seen since Linda passed, past the old library with the green roof, the barber shop that still had the same torn vinyl bench in the window, the bakery that used to give Kyle free cookies when he was small. I didn't go in anywhere, just watched, remembered. At noon I stopped into a diner, one of those places that still had glass sugar shakers and a handwritten pie menu. I sat at the counter, ordered black coffee and a slice of pecan, and watched people come and go. The woman next to me was maybe in her late 70s, silver hair pulled back, reading a paperback. She looked over, nodded. "You live around here?" "Not for much longer," I said, surprising myself with how final it sounded. She smiled, like she understood. Me neither. We didn't say much else, but it was the most peace I'd felt around someone in months. No expectations, no apologies, just presence. That night I pulled out my notebook again, started writing down names of towns, small ones with rivers and porches and community bulletin boards. No condos, no noise. I wasn't running away. I was moving toward something. I looked up apartments online, one-bedroom units with big windows, kitchens with just enough counter space for one old man to make his own peace. I bookmarked a few, called one, left a message. Still no word from Kyle. I thought I'd be boiling with anger by now, or mourning something. But the truth? I was already living like I'd left. That night I sat out back by the oak tree, sipping tea, looking up at the branches. "You grew up," I whispered. "So did I." Then I closed the door for the night, not knowing if I'd ever open it again. I started giving things away, not with fanfare, no garage sale, no big announcements, just small gestures, like returning borrowed time. The couple next door, Emily and Jorge, I handed them the old hedge trimmer. "Still works," I said. "Just needs a little oil." Jorge smiled like he'd won the lottery. Emily gave me a hug I didn't ask for, but didn't mind either. The mailman, Dave, the same guy who took over my route after I retired, stopped by to drop off a package. I handed him the snow shovel propped by the back door. "You'll need it more than I will this winter." He blinked. "You moving?" I nodded. He didn't ask where, just said, "You were the best we ever had on this route." That meant more than he probably knew. By midweek, the living room was down to one box and a folded lawn chair I was using as a seat. The air echoed now. No more photos, no more curtains, just bare walls and memories that didn't hurt as much anymore. Still no call from Kyle. Not a word. I don't know what I expected. A text? A voicemail? Maybe he'd drive by and see the sign, feel a sting of regret, knock on the door with tears in his eyes. But nothing. And strangely, I was okay with it. I'd spent so much of my life giving without expectation, fixing things quietly, paying the bills, making dinner, showing up. I used to think sacrifice was love. Now I know love is what you do when no one's watching, but it's also what you stop doing when no one cares. That night I made a sandwich, poured a glass of milk, and sat by the window. Outside, the oak tree swayed under the weight of the wind. The porch light flickered, a bulb I wouldn't bother to change. I stared into the dark, feeling something close to peace. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud, just 3 taps, like someone wasn't sure they were welcome. I froze. The clock read 9:47 p.m. My heart pounded. I stood slowly, walked to the door, and looked through the peephole. It wasn't Kyle. It was a woman. Late 30s, maybe. Dark coat, nervous eyes. I opened the door halfway. "Can I help you?" She hesitated. "Are you Mr. Thomas Rayburn?" I nodded. She glanced over her shoulder, then back at me. "I think we need to talk." "It's about your son." And just like that, the calm I'd built cracked down the middle. She didn't sit down right away, stood there in the doorway like she might still turn back. Her coat was soaked at the shoulders, her eyes darting around the living room like she expected Kyle to be hiding behind the next box. "I'm sorry to just show up like this," she said. "But I didn't know who else to talk to." I motioned to the lawn chair. "Sit." She hesitated, then lowered herself onto it slowly, hands folded tight in her lap. "My name's Amanda," she said. "I met Kyle about 6 months ago. We dated for a little while. Nothing serious. He said his mom had passed when he was a teenager and that his dad had died last spring." I didn't flinch. "Dead?" I asked, calm as I could manage. She nodded. "He said you left everything to him, that you had a pension and some inheritance money coming, and that it was just a matter of paperwork." I leaned back against the door frame, hands in my pockets. The old floor creaked beneath me. He say what he was going to do with all that? Amanda's eyes dropped. "He talked about buying a condo, out of state, somewhere fresh," he said. "He never went into detail, but something about the way he spoke about it, it didn't feel right." "And why come here now?" I asked. I found a document in his glove compartment, something about estate access. Your name was on it. But the date, it was from this year. She reached into her purse, pulled out a folded envelope. Inside was a copy of a power of attorney form, one I had never seen, but bearing what looked like my signature. It wasn't mine. I stared at it for a long time. My name, forged in black ink, over language that gave my son the right to manage my finances, the right to move money, the right to sell property, the house. My chest tightened, not from shock but recognition. This wasn't a new betrayal. It was just the final stroke on a canvas Kyle had been painting for years. "Why'd you bring this to me?" I asked finally. Amanda's voice wavered. "Because I think he's dangerous. Maybe not with fists, but with lies. And because I have a father too." I nodded. That was enough. I thanked her, told her she did the right thing. She left quietly, like a shadow disappearing down the steps. I sat down at the table, the forged papers in front of me, and I thought about Kyle, my boy who used to fall asleep on my chest. My boy who I once carried out of a thunderstorm in the middle of the night when he was too scared to walk. That boy was gone, and whoever wore his face now, he wasn't getting another chance. I picked up the phone, dialed Sheila. "Sheila, it's Tom. Let's push the closing up. Sooner the better." I hung up before she could ask why. Because the reason was simple. I wasn't just selling the house anymore. I was cutting the cord to a ghost. The next morning I walked into a lawyer's office with a manila envelope under my arm and no appointment. The receptionist looked up, startled by my sudden appearance. "Can I help you?" "I need to speak to someone about fraud," I said, "and I need it done before this week is out." 15 minutes later I was seated across from a man named Harris. Lean, gray suit, firm handshake, eyes that scanned you like a contract. I handed him the copy Amanda gave me. He read it silently, twice. "Whoever forged this knew what they were doing," he finally said. "Clean work. Wrong notary date, though. That's what'll burn it." I nodded. "I don't want to press charges, yet. I just want everything sealed. No more surprises." And that's what we did. We revoked every power of attorney, locked every joint access, redrafted the will to exclude Kyle entirely. Harris recommended dual verification on all accounts, real estate filings, and pension withdrawals. I agreed to every step. By afternoon, I was at the bank. They knew me there. I'd mailed checks from their sidewalk drop box for 30 years. But today I walked in like someone they didn't recognize. "Close the checking," I said. "Open a new one under a trust." No names but mine. It felt like removing rusted bolts from a ship long anchored in place, each one a creak of freedom. Back home the house was quiet. Too quiet. The living room echoed with the sound of my keys on the kitchen counter. The light hit the floor just right, the same spot where Kyle once opened a Christmas train set and squealed like he'd won the lottery. I sat on the bare floor, legs stretched, back against the wall. I didn't cry. I just breathed. And then I spoke aloud, to no one in particular. "You were a good kid once." The words didn't hurt. They landed soft, like a blanket being folded. "I don't know where you went, but I hope someday you come back." I stayed there until the shadows shifted, until the house felt less like mine and more like a postcard I was done writing on. Then I stood up, stretched my back, and whispered the two words that had taken 66 years to learn: no more. Tomorrow, the movers would come, and when they did, I wouldn't be sad. I'd be ready. They came just after sunrise. 2 young guys and a woman, all in matching blue shirts that said, "Quick Hands Movers." They were polite, fast, didn't ask many questions. Good. I wasn't in the mood for answers. I'd labeled everything the night before. The boxes were stacked like bricks in a half-built wall. Kitchen, books, photos, donate, keep. The recliner didn't come. Neither did the dining table. Some things belonged to the house more than me. I stood in the front yard, arms crossed, watching them carry out pieces of my life. The couch where Linda used to fall asleep reading. The lamp Kyle knocked over when he was 10. The mirror I'd always meant to replace but never did, because no one looked in it but me. They loaded it all with quiet precision. No emotion, just labor. Across the street, Mrs. Keegan stood on her porch in her robe, arms folded. She'd lived there since '91. She waved once, confused. I gave her a small nod. No explanations, just goodbye. Inside, the house emptied like a draining well. Each echo grew louder. The kitchen tile felt colder under my feet. The silence wasn't sad, it was honest. At noon, the last box was placed in the truck. The woman in the blue shirt handed me a clipboard. "You good to go, Mr. Rayburn?" I looked around the hollow shell that used to be my world. "Yeah, I'm good." They drove off. I walked through the house one last time, room by room. In the bathroom, the cracked tile above the sink was still there, the one I'd meant to fix. In the hallway, the nail where Linda's wedding photo used to hang. In Kyle's old room, sunlight still landed on the carpet in a way that made me remember lullabies I hadn't sung in decades. I didn't cry. I touched the walls once, just once. Then I walked to the front door, turned the lock, and stepped outside. No suitcase, just a duffel bag slung over my shoulder. The air smelled like cut grass and something new I couldn't name. I didn't look back. Some people say closure is a conversation. Sometimes it's just a key left on a counter and a door that closes with no one watching. I didn't have a destination in mind, just a tank full of gas, a thermos of coffee, and an old playlist of Linda's burned onto a CD that still played in my rusted sedan. I pointed the car south and drove. No GPS, no phone calls, no check-ins, just road. I passed through towns that looked like postcards left too long in the sun. Paint peeling, flags fluttering, diners with names like Marge's Kitchen and Corner Stop Cafe. By dusk, I found a place. It wasn't fancy. Nothing ever is when it's real. Just a brick inn off Main Street in a town called Miller's Ridge. The kind of place where you still fill out a form with a pen, and the key is made of actual metal. Room 4, second floor, corner window, facing a faded mural of a trout jumping out of a river. The room smelled like lavender and old wood. The floor creaked. The bedspread was floral. The TV didn't work right, but the lamp beside the nightstand turned on with a soft click that felt like a promise. I didn't unpack much, just the bare essentials. A change of clothes, my notebook, a photo of Linda folded into my wallet. I went downstairs, walked across the street to a little diner still open, ordered meatloaf and mashed potatoes, sat in a corner booth. No one knew my name. No one asked where I'd come from. And for once I didn't feel invisible. I felt free. I ate slow, sipped my water, watched the waitress refill coffee for a couple arguing softly in the next booth. The world went on. Back in the room, I lay on the bed and stared at the ceiling. No plans, no expectations, no son to call, no house to tend. And I realized something. Silence wasn't punishment anymore. It was peace. I didn't dream that night. Not of Kyle, not of Linda, not of rain or roads or locks turning, just the slow, steady hum of freedom pressing gently against the window pane. Morning came soft in Miller's Ridge, a pale gold light through the lace curtain, birds I didn't recognize chirping somewhere outside. I made myself a cup of coffee from the little machine in the room, sat by the window and just listened. There was no rush, no errands, no waiting for a call that wouldn't come. I grabbed my jacket and wandered. The town was quiet, just enough people to make it feel alive, but not so many that you got lost in the crowd. A dog barked behind a fence. Wind chimes clinked on a porch. A woman swept her steps and nodded as I passed. I nodded back. The library was an old brick building with warped wooden floors and the smell of sun-faded pages. I spent 2 hours in there, not reading, just sitting. The librarian didn't seem to mind. At the farmer's market, I bought a jar of blackberry jam and a loaf of sourdough from a woman who looked like she'd been making bread longer than I'd been alive. "Passing through?" she asked. "Something like that," I said. I stopped by a mechanic's garage to ask about oil changes. The man, James, was younger than Kyle but had the same worn hands and tired eyes. He didn't talk much, which I liked. Back in the room, I opened my notebook, wrote without thinking. "Dear Kyle, you were once my reason for everything. I don't know where that boy went. Maybe life was harder on you than I saw. Or maybe I protected you so well, you never learned how to carry weight without hurting others. Either way, I need you to know I loved you, even when you left me in the rain, even when you lied. Even now. But love doesn't mean I have to stay where I'm not wanted. I've let go. That doesn't mean I don't feel it. It means I finally know the difference between loyalty and self-abandonment. Goodbye, son. Dad." I closed the notebook, didn't cry. Instead, I looked out the window and watched a boy ride his bike down the street, legs too short for the pedals, but determined. And I thought, maybe this town isn't just a stopover. Maybe it's a beginning. Time slowed in Miller's Ridge, in the way you only notice when you stop running from something. By the 8th day, the waitress at the diner called me Mr. T. The librarian saved me a copy of the local paper. I found a notice on the bulletin board above the post office. 1 bedroom above Finley's Hardware, available now. I called. The place was small. Scuffed floorboards, windows with flaking paint, a kitchen the size of a closet, but it had light. Morning light that poured through sheer curtains like quiet hope. I signed the lease on the spot. Spent the next few days scrubbing walls, oiling hinges, fixing a cabinet door that wouldn't shut right. My body ached in familiar ways. But this time, it wasn't for someone else's comfort. It was mine. No ghosts lived here. Just me. I bought a small radio, played jazz in the afternoons, brewed coffee on the hot plate, sat by the window and watched people move without urgency. Then the letter came. No return address. Just my name. The handwriting was unmistakable. Kyle's. I stared at the envelope for almost an hour before opening it. Inside were 4 sentences. "Heard you sold the house. Why didn't you tell me? That place was my childhood. I hope you're not doing something stupid with the money." That was it. No apology, no mention of the rain, no acknowledgement of the forgery, no remorse, just ownership of a childhood he had long since abandoned and entitlement to a father he'd left standing in the cold. I folded the note, walked outside to the alley behind the hardware store, struck a match. The paper caught instantly, burned quick and mean. I watched until it was nothing but ash. Then I went upstairs, opened the window and let the breeze in. And I whispered, not with anger, but finality, "Not anymore." He could keep his questions. I had finally found my answers. The rhythm of life changed without me noticing. I woke with the sun, brewed coffee, stretched my knees, watered 3 little herb pots on the windowsill, basil, thyme, and mint. I don't know why I planted them. Maybe I just needed to watch something grow. A stray cat started showing up, big tabby with a notched ear and eyes like it had seen things. It never came inside, just sat on the ledge and stared at me like it was keeping score. I named it Walter. Most afternoons I walked to the library, not to read, though I did sometimes, but to do something new. I started tucking notes into the pages of books, handwritten messages. You matter. Whatever you're carrying, it doesn't make you unlovable. Someone out there is rooting for you, even if they don't know your name. Nobody knew it was me. That made it better. I wasn't trying to fix the world, just offer it a warm cup of something. One evening, I sat on the apartment floor, sipping mint tea I'd grown myself, jazz playing low from the radio, and realized something that stopped me mid-sip. I hadn't thought about Kyle in 2 days, not out of avoidance, just absence. The pain was no longer a tenant in my chest. It had packed up and moved out. Maybe it would visit again, uninvited, but it didn't live here anymore. And then, another knock. Not a letter, not a ghost, a real knock. I opened the door expecting the landlord, maybe a wrong delivery. It was the librarian, Miriam, 60-ish, silver braid down her back, holding a book with a pressed flower between its pages. She smiled, eyes soft. "I found your note," she said. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "In Of Mice and Men. It said, just because someone gave up on you doesn't mean you should give up on yourself." I smiled faintly. "Sounds like something a guy would write if he'd been through some things." She nodded. "Would you like to join me for coffee sometime?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes, I would." She handed me the book. "Tomorrow. 9. The Diner." After she left, I stood at the door a little longer than necessary. The wind moved through the alley. Walter meowed once and jumped down, and I realized not all doors close to keep you in, some close so you'll open a better one. The diner smelled like cinnamon and burnt toast. Miriam was already there, sitting by the window, hands wrapped around a mug. She waved me over like we'd done this 100 times. "Hope you don't mind I ordered coffee," she said. I slid into the booth. "You made the right call." The waitress brought another mug, poured, left us alone. We talked. Not like strangers fumbling through pleasantries, but like people who understood what silence meant. Who knew what it was to wake up beside absence? She'd lost her husband 5 years ago. "Cancer," she said, like she was naming a neighbor. I told her about Linda, about Kyle, without the details. Just enough to explain the tired behind my eyes. She didn't try to fix me, just listened. There's something holy about being heard without being healed. After an hour, she laughed at something I said, some dumb joke about the cat. It was a real laugh. Her eyes crinkled. She touched my hand. "You know," she said, "you don't seem like a man who gave up." "I did," I said, "but I got bored." We laughed again. We finished our coffee. She insisted on paying. "Next time's yours," she said. Next time. I walked back through Miller's Ridge slower than usual. The sun was bright. Walter trotted beside me for a block, then disappeared behind a porch swing. Upstairs, I opened my window. The herbs rustled in a soft breeze. The radio played Ella Fitzgerald. I didn't sit down right away. I just stood there, breathing, alive in the quiet. And for the first time since I stood in the rain with bags in my hands and a son who wouldn't look back, I felt the flicker of something I couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe, or something that comes after it. Fall came slow to Miller's Ridge. The leaves turned the color of old sunsets. The mornings cooled, and the diner started serving pumpkin pie before noon. My herbs died one by one, as they do. I didn't mind. I'd been here 3 months. Most of my neighbors knew me by name. Miriam and I met for coffee every Tuesday and Saturday. We didn't label it, didn't need to. Sometimes we sat in silence. Sometimes we told stories we'd never told anyone else. She liked old movies. I liked hearing her laugh. I fixed a few shelves in the library, started organizing the donation bin when no one was looking, made myself useful. The cat, Walter, came around less now. I assumed he'd found someone else's ledge, or maybe he just knew I didn't need watching anymore. Kyle never wrote back, never called, not a word. And strangely, that felt right. Not every story needs a reunion. Some just need an ending. I still carried the photo of Linda, still said good morning to her when the light hit the windows just right. But the grief had softened, like waves that used to crash, now just lap at your ankles. I wrote one last note. Not for a stranger, not for a book, just for me. I folded it and tucked it into my notebook, the one I no longer carried everywhere. You survived, you mattered, and you walked away when it finally broke your heart for the last time. I stood by the window and watched a boy on a skateboard nearly wipe out, then grin as he caught himself. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, and I whispered to no one in particular, "That'll do, Tom, that'll do." Then I closed the notebook and let the rest of my life begin.